Welcome to the Core Concepts Lectures. I'm your host, James Renford Powell, and this program is sponsored by One Community Center, this is the facility we're in, and by the Institute of Applied Metaphysics and the Church of Revelation. And this is a show where we have spiritual leaders, philosophers, come and tell us what they believe, why they believe it, and what they're doing about it. And our guest today is Elaine Orland, and Elaine is the president of the Theosophical Society in Memphis and has been a long-time member. She is a seeker. She's been involved in a number of different programs, and we're just going to turn it over to her and let her talk. Welcome to the show.
Thank you, Jim. Thank you. And welcome to everyone who's here today.
Thank you.
And to our audience there. I appreciate you tuning in and being in. So I was billed as president of the Theosophical Society, and that I am, not of the entire Theosophical Society, but of here in Memphis. We jokingly like to call it the Presley branch of the Theosophical Society, although that's not what it is really. So I will talk about that in a little bit, but I would like to talk in general about the path of spirituality in life, kind of the practical path of spirituality as I've gotten to walk that and walk that with other people. A large part of my life has been involved in looking at addictions treatment, so some of that's going to come into what happens when addictions get involved in a person's path and where that can take them either to the negative or sometimes to the positive as well. So we'll touch on that a little bit. I am Elaine Orland. I'm a clinical social worker, and I work primarily with people with severe and persistent mental illness now. And I get to learn a lot about that. I get to learn a lot about spirituality from watching people with what we call disorders that have them thinking in a different way than we usually do. And when you watch schizophrenics and folks like that, you can, and you see it from a spiritual perspective, often there's something different to see there than perhaps what the traditional mental health perspective might be. So that has enriched my spiritual life as well, most recently. A little bit of background on me. I was originally exposed to spiritual concepts through my family. My mother was interested in yoga and in Edgar Cayce when I was a wee small tyke. And so we freely talked about those sorts of things. I, of course, couldn't understand that much at that point in time, but was exposed to Hatha Yoga and a little bit of the ARE philosophy when I was very small. And then as I moved up through life, I in high school became interested in the Rosicrucians and studied for a little while with the Rosicrucians in Oceanside. And that opened up the vista that then eventually led me over to the Theosophical thinking, which is kind of a backwards track because it actually came the other way. They were a spin-off of the Theosophical Society. So that was fairly early on. Also, very young, I perchance was led into doing a course of Silva mind control, and I was about 14 at that time when I went through Silva mind control at the time. So that opened me up to different possibilities in opening an unfoldment in a spiritual way. And from there, I've just sort of layered things on. So where I come from is a very eclectic path, a multi-tendrilled spiritual path, but one that I found very interesting. And a lot of those pieces that I've talked about originated from the roots of the Theosophical Society. So I will talk some about the history of the Theosophical Society. We like to call it the Theosophical Group here in our town because the Theosophical Society sometimes sounds kind of hoity-toity, and we find sometimes that people are not as reticent to come see what we're about if we just call it the Theosophical Group. Theosophical, by the way, means, Thea, of course, means divine, and Sophia means wisdom. So Theosophical means divine wisdom, and that's what we do in the Theosophical Society, is we study the divine wisdom or the perennial philosophy or the ancient wisdoms or the wisdom teachings. There's a lot of different names that different traditions have called the ancient teachings, but that's what theosophical means, is looking at those things and seeing how those work in our lives. It was started, and I've got notes, and I'm going to be referring to those because it helps with the dates and the names and that sort of thing. So it was begun in 1875 by two people, Helena Petrovna Blavatsky, and she was from Russian noble birth, and she was one wild chick. she really was. From that century, she actually was married at one point in time and just refused to live with her husband and said she was going off traveling, and proceeded to do that. She was quite psychic from a young age, and also very much her own thinker. And she began to travel, and she began to travel alone. And she liked meeting people, and she liked having a lot of people around her, and she liked smoking cigars, and she was just quite the character.
I like her already.
I think she liked her. Yeah, we like her too. But she was quite the character. And she was also very much appalled by where society had gotten in the late 1800s. At that point in time, there was very much a mechanical, scientific view of the world. The universe was thought to be run kind of like, running like a clock, kind of with, cogs and wheels and atoms bouncing off of each other and that sort of thing. And there was the Cartesian split of mind and body and spirit being very separate, was very much in play. And as well, there was a lot of empiricism there. There were a lot of white folks that thought they had the right to disregard or to override and to take advantage of people in their colonies, and especially in other races. And she was not getting behind that idea at all. And so she wanted to pull together the threads of the perennial philosophy that had been in all of the religions, ancient religions up to that time. That was what she wanted to do. Now she found two things. One, she had to support herself some way because it wasn't coming from Daddy. And so she wrote. She was a prolific writer, and she would write articles both in English and in Russian for magazines that had to do actually with a lot of things, but especially with spiritual things. And so she was a prolific writer from early on because she had to pay her light bill that kind of way. But she also knew that she needed to shake up the current system if she wanted to have any kind of an effect. The scientific view that was currently in play. And so many people were believing that everything, it was very empirical. They were just believing that science could explain everything back then, kind of like we think, a lot of people think today. But that was around of that back then. And so she began some of her demonstrations by doing things that were quite psychic. She could do it. She could flip everything in the room upside down and have it floating. Wow. She could do amazing work like that with manipulating energy around her. She was extremely gifted. She doesn't recommend that, and that's not part of what the Theosophical Society has people do at all anymore. No. And she said that was not what she wanted to teach people, but that was what she wanted to be able to take to the scientists and say, okay, explain that, will you? And they couldn't. So it kind of gave her a little bit of an entree to be able to say some other things. And what she really wanted to be able to say was, let's look at what has been in all the religions. Very much like the universal laws that you talk about. It's the same thing. So So that's how she got their attention. Now the other person that was involved in the beginning of the society was Alcott was his name, and Henry Alcott, and he was a colonel from America, from our country, and he was involved especially in looking at corruption in the armed forces. That was his day job. And he was also involved in the investigation of the assassination of Abraham Lincoln, which I thought was interesting. It was a new fact I learned recently. Yeah. And he and Madame Blavatsky hooked up together for this purpose of spiritual growth. And he was kind of the business mind there, and she was sort of the influx of information. And they began the society in New York City in 1875. They didn't stay in the States very long, though, after that. As soon as they got the society established, they went to India. She had already traveled extensively. She had been in Tibet, she had been in India, she had traveled in many, many countries and learned from who she could find. Her apartments were always a place where scientists and philosophers and spiritual leaders could come and, I guess, smoke cigars and talk. Just sort of their version of late night poker, I guess. But it was a place where people could gather, and she could help to facilitate discussions and also learn herself things that she could blend together. And she continued to write. She wrote her articles, and then she began to write books as well. Isis Unveiled was her first book. It's a little tough to get through that one. That was kind of where she started to be able to put these principles together. And then, of course, the main book that she is known for in a lot of circles is The Secret Doctrine. And The Secret Doctrine it was a 2-volume book when she wrote it, and it's 3 now. But it is where she goes very much into exploring 2 things. The first section of the book talks about the cosmogenesis, basically how things are laid out from what she knew and what she divined. She very much was open to information coming through that went into the book. So the first book is on how the cosmos is laid out, cosmogenesis, and then the second book is Anthropogenesis, which is about where we came from. Really what the human race, the stages it came through and will continue to evolve into. So those were the main pieces. And it's a book, it's over 100 years, well over 100 years old now, and is still very much studied by Theosophists and other spiritual seekers everywhere. So that was the main piece that she put together. Now the Theosophical Society itself has not got a leader of sorts. It's very much a society that wants people to do their own exploration, their own knowledge, get their knowledge from their own inner sources. They do believe in encouraging people to study, but they very much say, don't take anything anybody says at face value. And even if it's someone that you very much perhaps even revere as far as their writings, let your inner wisdom be what tells you what is right for you. And I think I've read that in your stuff as well, Jim. And so that's very much there in the society. They do have 3 objects, and I wanted to find those in a way that we can okay, there we go. The first object of the society, and this is what, if you want to be a Theosophist, they say there's really only 3 things that we would hope that you go along with, or that you agree with. The first is that they want to form a nucleus of a universal brotherhood of man. And when she came up with that, when HPB, as she's generally called because it's a lot easier to say, when she came up with that, that was very radical because of the imperialism that was happening at that time. So to say that the races are equal and that everyone has the same worth the same value, and that we are all in one brotherhood was very radical in that day. But that was the first object of the society. Object meaning, I suppose, not really a belief, but a direction, I suppose, is what you could say. So that was the first, to foster religious and racial unity and peace and service. That if we are all part of one brotherhood and one humanity, it means, be nice. Basically, be nice to each other. The second was to encourage the study of comparative religion, philosophy, and science. And she began to do that, of course, with the people that she would meet, and that's what she wanted to continue. She began to blend these back together. Part of her mission was to help the scientists see that it's important to have a spiritual base, and to help the spiritual people and the philosophers see that it's also important to look at the scientists and see how current science can blend with what they are saying. So it was very much a weaving process and continues to be. So to encourage the study of religion, science, and philosophy together. And then the third object was to explore the potentials and the resources that are latent in humanity. The things that we can actually do that we don't know we can do. So those were the three things that she laid out as the objects of the society. And Colonel Alcott, he was the initial president of the Theosophical Society, and he was until he died in 1907. So they put that together, and then they went back to India. They wanted more of to bring in more of an Eastern flavor, but what she really wanted to do with being in the East was to be able to blend Eastern philosophy and what was going on in the West in a way that was palatable to people in the West, in a way that we could get it. And so that's part of what she did. So they were in India for a couple of years, and then they ended up in Adyar, India, and that's where they set up the international headquarters of the Theosophical Society, and it's still there today. So the international headquarters is there in India, and by the way, the American section, the headquarters is in Wheaton, Illinois, which is a suburb of Chicago, and it's been there for a very long time as well.
The president is Indian too, isn't she?
Yes, Radha Brunier is Indian, and she's the president. She's the daughter of Sri Ram, and she lives over there and has been the president for quite a long time. So some of the principles of the society, I'll run through them here. I'm gonna look through it. The society, it's non-sectarian, non-political, non-dogmatic. Other than those three objects, there's not a lot there's nothing that anybody has to believe or not believe. And a lot of people believe a lot of different things. It's not a religion. It's not anything that you have to give up your church for, or that kind of thing. There's people from all different religious disciplines or none, and that's fine. It's more of a way of viewing things and a way of perspective on life than it is any kind of a religion. There's no charismatic leader that one has to look at or follow. There are some writers, past writers and current writers that are there to study, and they actually have a publishing house so they can publish some of those works as well. But you're free to study whoever you want to study. At the end of our talk today, I'll give you some websites and that kind of thing if you want to look at that some more. But it's not any kind of thing that people have to do anything in particular. They believe in the right of individual freedom of thought. Everyone is encouraged to conduct their own personal study for truth, and they believe that comes from inside, just like you teach, that's something that is going to, you look for what rings true and what you can actually experience from inside to move into a place of knowing rather than a place of believing or hoping. And, easier said than done, but possible. Death is generally seen by most of the members as a reoccurring process. So reincarnation is generally what people believe because of the in the cosmogenesis, when she laid out what happens in the universe and in the earth and the process of that, the idea that everything is running in cyclical patterns is very prominent in theosophical thinking, including us. So most people do have a belief in reincarnation, and they see, let's see, that there's one life that pervades everything, and that we're all little parts of that. I like the idea that I heard somewhere that because you think about, okay, if I'm just a little piece of God or whatever, what does that mean? And then I went to Disneyland once and saw my first hologram, and and a hologram is something that if you have a hologram film, from what I understand, I haven't actually seen the film, I've just seen the holograms out there, and like the haunted house and important places like that at Disneyland, Disney World too. But with the holographic film, if you cut it in half and you shine the light through it, you're going to get the full image from each of those. It just will be a little less structured, a little less distinct. If you cut that in half, you're still going to get the full image. It'll just be a little less distinct. And you can keep cutting the film up and you're going to get the whole image. So to me, that's a way to look at what we might be like as far as the unity of all that is, and that we are as well all that is, but we're some sort of a piece of that, but we're still all that is, but we're also a piece of all that is. So thinking of it in terms of a holographic image works for me when I see myself in that kind of way. Theosophists generally think that whatever you sow, you're going to reap. So that the balancing act of karma is generally something that they believe is part of our life. That we're going to get what we need at the times that we need it, and are going to get to feel what different positions and different experiences can bring us, and that our general path is one where we're coming from that unity of all that is, and we're learning about. So we're coming from the one, and we're experiencing the many. To go back to the one, but to go back to the one in full awareness. So that's one way that they talk about that. So the Theosophical Society is well over 100 years old. It is in about 70 countries. There's about 150 branches here in the States where people study. They have a lot of different pieces to them. There's the Theosophical Society in America, and that's what our group is a part of. There's also a service branch of that do work in different parts of the world. And the service branch, they were one of the things that they were the first responders when the tsunami hit India. It hit somewhat very close to Adyar, to where the society headquarters is. So they were the ones that went in with relief. They were there right away after the tsunami, and they also were the ones that started setting up water production units. There are units that can produce water out of, I don't know, the air or contaminated water, or however they do that. But they brought in those units. So there's a service branch. They very much believe in service. The president after Alcott, Colonel Alcott, was Annie Besant, who was a brilliant orator. She wrote some books as well, but she was very service-minded, and she was very much involved in helping to bring about home rule in India and that sort of thing. So she really brought that service component into being part of the Theosophical Society. There's an esoteric school for people that have been part of the society for a while and they want to really dig deep and dive into it's pretty much a Western mystery school, and it's available to people that want to go down to that level of study. And the other really wonderful thing here in the States is that up in Wheaton at at Alcott. Alcott is what the national headquarters is called. It was named, of course, after Colonel Alcott. But they have a library that is a wonderful repository of esoteric teachings and religious, scientific, and philosophical teachings that I think it's second to none in the United States. And they do their lending library is done through the mail, and they also have been very aggressive about building a web presence and having a lot of their materials available online and in that sort of format, and certainly in DVDs and CDs and that kind of thing. So they really are trying to, for an old organization, they're trying to stay as modern as they can and stay with the times and move it forward. Let's see if there's anything else important that I wanted to let you know about. Yeah. So that's what we are. The Theosophical Society predates a lot of the other things that people are involved in, and actually opened the door for a lot of the other, they're not even really spin-off organizations anymore. They're huge in and of themselves, but they were at the time. The Rosicrucians were outcropping there. Unity Church. A lot of the other things were. They that was kind of the mom and daddy, the parent organization for a lot of what we consider to be just a regular part of our spiritual lives now, a lot of us, and they were there. So we do meet here. The branch here has been active for many years, and we do have a once-a-month meeting, and I'll go into that a little bit later. But that's the Theosophical Society. I was introduced to it through my mother initially. She was she ran a little publishing house in Illinois. We lived up there at the time, and we published their magazine. They have a magazine called Quest Magazine. I'm not sure if it was called Quest back then or if it was called the Theosophist. But she worked in a publishing house, and she would set all of the copy for the magazine. And she had to set it twice back in those days. That was long before computer typesetting and that sort of thing. So she would set all the type for the copy, and you'd have to set it twice to get the justification right. And she was the one that would take it to the society to get it proofed and that sort of thing. And so she got interested in the society that way. And so that opened the door for me as a child to get introduced to that. And then when I got interested in the Rosicrucians, the library and the programs that they had going on in Wheaton at the time were very good and still are. And so I started going over there at that point. So there was a pretty early influence in my life. So questions, comments. I can go into.
Might explain a little bit about Rosicrucian, because I know a lot of people don't even know what that is.
Oh, the Rosicrucians, there's actually a couple of major groups of Rosicrucians. They're both, I think, in California. They're both California based. One I don't know so much about. That's the one that you see advertised in magazines a lot of times. That's not the one I was involved with. The one I was involved with is in Oceanside, California. But it's basically a Western mystery school as well, but it does have a Christian base. Rosencrantz was one of the early people involved in that. And it very much, its main text is called the Rosicrucian Cosmo-Conception. And when I started reading The Secret Doctrine, I found that it was very similar to the Cosmo-Conception. And later I found out that Max Heindel, who was the person who was the author of most of the books for this branch of the Rosicrucians, had come down through the Theosophical ranks as well. So it's like, oh, well, that makes sense. It was actually a little bit more easy to understand it in the Cosmo-Conception. So having read that, it's easier to understand the Secret Doctrine. But they're still alive and well too. And for people that have a Christian base, or want to blend a Christian perspective into their search. The Rosicrucians in Oceanside are very good, and they have a lot of study material. I think almost all of their books are just online now. You can pay them something if you want, but they're
A lot of them too.
yeah.
Now, Rosicrucian is really Rose Cross. The Rose Cross. So it was, but they even claim a origin all the way back to the Great White Brotherhood. They go back to almost the Essene.
Right, and they go very deep into their studies. They have a very much a tiered study system as well, and you can kind of work your way in and in there, depending on what level you want. So that was an early influence, and that was because I
Got a question?
yes.
Yeah, I keep hearing you mention the whole idea of the secret doctrine. Of course, there was this big explosion about this movie, The Secret, which I rushed out and bought. So how much of that is tied into the,
Secret doctrine?
Well, the Secret, I think, the movie that you're talking about was based more on, I think the law of attraction would probably be the main universal law that it was based on, and of course there's been hubbub about it since.
As if it was the only one. But
Right, they focused very much on that, and there are some other some of the people involved in the Secret I knew in California. They're different things. Same word, different things. But The Secret was I think a good opening for a lot of people in realizing that you actually maybe do have some control over what happens in your life. Some people, I think, felt that they overdid that, and certainly they put a lot of drama to it. I liked it myself. I liked it myself when I watched it, just because there's so much media on the negative. That to me it's nice to see anything that is going to maybe even just get people thinking in some kind of way, that life can be done in a different sort of way. But they're not related.
so the secret is knowing that we have things that we could do that we don't know that we can do?
I suppose that The Secret, if you wanted to kind of hook that up with a philosophical thought, it might be that the third object, which is that there are powers latent in, exploring powers latent in humanity. So yeah, that there are things that we can do that we don't know that we can do. I believe that.
Basically everything.
But it's really, the real thing is that there are certain principles that are immutable, and that everything is based on, and that you have the capability of identifying and verifying for yourself. You don't have to take it on somebody else's word. That's really you mentioned unity. Now, all of these science of mind, all of them came about in 100 years ago. This was quite a blossoming.
It was.
In that
period.
That
That was very much the time of, it kind of opened a whole. The spiritualism movement was right around the turn of the century. That all started to roll out right then, and science of mind and unity, I think, and came from similar backgrounds, and then there's Christian Science as well, and
we've been able to find connection between unity and Phineas Parker's Quimby, and the connection between the Fillmores and Mary Baker Eddy. There was some interaction there.
Right.
I just wondered if there was interaction with the Theosophical Society.
I believe that if you go back in the tree, that it goes back to the Theosophical Society. They will know more about that. Linda probably knows more about that than I do. But yeah, that's where a lot of those branches came out. Was starting with the Theosophical Society, and then a lot of other people thought, well, I think I'd rather do it this way, or I think this would be more what I'd be interested, or I'd like to focus on this aspect of that. And so a lot of these different ways, different paths were delineated, but they all come from the same precepts.
Music behind her when she's doing it. Light music.
I do sing. Be careful, I'll break into song.
Like conducting the music.
Light.
But if anything, Theosophical Society, your experience there led you into a lot of other searches.
It did. I ended up in a lot of very, very interesting places. I ended up well, I guess the first, it's hard even sometimes to think about what came first. The first place that I ended up after high school, I was in college in New England and had an experience of, I was bored one day, so I went down to the bookstore in town. Thought I would find just some, science fiction or fantasy book that I could spend the weekend with, and a book just, it probably didn't jump off the shelf, but that's my memory of it, is that it fell on the floor. I don't think that's probably what happened. I think probably my eyes just went to it, and it was called The Magic of Findhorn, which I called Findhorn at the time, but it was a Magic of Findhorn, and I thought it was just, a little fantasy book that would be cool, and I could just sit in my dorm and read it. And I took it home, and it was telling me about a place called Findhorn in Scotland, a spiritual community, where they had been growing 40-pound cabbages and 50-pound broccolis and huge vegetables. And had been doing that by working with the nature spirits of these vegetables, which would tell them what to do with the soil and how to work with the plants. And they did that. Eileen and Peter Caddy and Dorothy McLean were the people that founded Findhorn, or that started there. Well, actually, they just kind of ended up in a scrap heap in a trailer park in northern Scotland. That's really where it is. They had ended up there. Now, they had been very deep spiritual seekers, and it was just, sort of universal maneuvering that had them, ended up shoved up there in northern Scotland in the sand. And so Eileen would receive messages from the devas or the angels of the plants that would tell her, and she would write it all down, would tell her what to do with the soil. And she would give it to Peter in the morning. She would usually get these messages at night. She would give it to her husband Peter, and he would go out and get whatever it said to get. That was his gift. His gift was, he was not able to receive messages or that kind of thing, but he was able to follow directions. And so Peter would follow directions. And they started working with the gardens, and that was kind of their initial manifestation or demonstration of being able to work between the kingdoms, between the human kingdom and the plant kingdom and the angels of the green. Yeah, and that's what they did. And so originally, that was what brought attention to Findhorn, were these incredible agricultural anomalies. And it started to create a little community. Other people came there to live, and they eventually took over and bought the trailer park up there. But they lived in trailers for a long time. Finally, when they bought the place, they started building more permanent buildings, and they bought an old resort in Forres, Scotland, called Cluny Hill, and it's still there, and they run programs all the time. So I ended up with this little book at school in New England, and reading it, going, oh my, I have got to go there. And I don't know that I had anything to do with laying that out myself, certainly not consciously, probably subconsciously, but I ended up going to Findhorn and staying there. I was gonna study for about 6 weeks, and ended up staying there about 4 months, and studied the community, found out how the organizational structure was, some of the history, that kind of thing. And it's quite an amazing place. That was probably the place that I went that allowed me to be okay with all my weird ways of thinking. All those things that were like, man, I sure don't think like the people around me. That was where I realized, okay, I'm all right. There's a lot of people in the world that think this way. That was also where I started reading David Spangler. David Spangler was one of the early members of the Findhorn community, and he was one of the writers. And when I went there in the 70s, one of his books was one of the kind of required little texts for the first week there. Everybody that was there for their first time went through what was called Experience Week, and that's where they oriented you to the grounds and taught you a little bit about what history was and what was going on there. And Spangler's book, at that point I think it was Toward a Planetary Vision, was one that we read. And Reflections on the Christ was one that I had started reading before I ever got there. And both of those books they just rang true. You know, those times when you read those things that just are like, ah, yes. You know, that's what I've been thinking, and somebody put it in print. And that was some of what I was exposed to at Findhorn. Stayed there for 4 months, did a longer process there. I wore this today because this was a little emblem, and I don't know if you can do a close-up on this. I'll try to hold it still, Cedric. This was a sign that came to me in a dream. I decided to do about a month on an island called Arid, off of the coast of Scotland. And in a dream one night, this was an emblem, and it woke me up, and I drew a picture of it, and then years later, I had a jeweler make it. I don't consider myself particularly a Christian person, although the true teachings of Christ are very important to me. But this cross, it looks like a cross at first, but the bottom leg of this goes all the way around. And to me, that's just become more and more important as I've gone through my spiritual journey. And also on the ends of each of these, of the arms and the legs, there are lots of little balls. And so for me, I realized that I'm pulling from the divine, from a lot of different things from the divine, and from the side I'm pulling from humanity, a lot of different ideas, a lot of different people in humanity. I'm also pulling from my human personality, pulling things to create that, a lot of different elements there, and also from the earth. And that at the moment that the earth kind of is where all of these things are brought together in a unity for me. So currently that's what my little sigil means to me. It changes over time. But that was part of my Findhorn experience. I came back from Findhorn very much opened up. You know, very much opened up. That was the place when Cedric, you were talking earlier about coincidence and synchronicities, and that was the time when for me, coincidence became a way of life. That's when I really got to experience that there's something, or either some aspect of myself or something out there that has a bigger picture than I do, and that sort of has things laid out. So that's either some aspect of me working on a higher level, or, you know, if you want to call it God or soul or higher self, you know, I don't really care what the name is. But that's when that became a reality for me. That life is a benefit. That life is generally beneficial and benevolent, and that it's about opening myself up to seeing what's out there and paying attention. You know, kind of keeping my eyes open. It also was a place where I started to realize what could get in the way of that. And the things that I have found that can really get in the way of that are fear. You know, that's one of the main things, is fear. And also what we would call, I like to call them major distractions. You could call them addictions. But those things in our lives that we use to blunt ourselves from really being present. And it could be, you know, any kind of a addictive issue that someone might run into, whether that's addiction to alcohol, drugs, food, sex, cigarettes, whatever, you name it. But media is a huge one now. Media, online gambling, internet porn, you know, there's lots and lots and lots of things out there that can blunt me from being able to experience my spiritual life. Now the flip side of that is that I think that none of that is wasted. That if I've had those kind of things going on in my life, that it can be used as fertilizer for growing my spiritual life, so to speak. You think? So I think we can turn that, you know, stuff into fertilizer for moving forward in life and for deepening our spiritual path. And sometimes, really, our addictions or our distractions can put us in such a bind that we have to turn to something
They
spiritual.
become catalysts.
Yes,
for you to
absolutely,
make
absolutely.
It's a little off of that subject, but I'm wondering if where Feinhorn is it anywhere near Abbey Sinclair?
I don't know where that is.
And
Findhorn is on the North Sea, so it is about, it's not too far from Inverness, but it is right at the top.
I used to work with a fellow from Inverness, but Abbey Sinclair is the one that's featured in the Da Vinci Code and
Oh,
some
okay.
of those. And
Okay.
but it's a real place,
Okay.
an abbey that was built on the design of the temple in Jerusalem.
Oh,
And it has things on the wall that people couldn't have known about. For instance, things, when it was built, you wouldn't think that they would know about it, like corn, vegetables. There's certain things that were on there.
huh.
And I just thought maybe it might have been close by.
You know, I don't know. It would depend on where that is. But Findhorn is up in the town of Forres, if you look on a map. Not all that far from Loch Ness, but it's right at the top on the North Sea. And the interesting thing about being, we're here in America, so we're and we've, covered up a lot of the Native American sites and that sort of thing. But over there, a lot of sites are preserved. Ancient sites are preserved. And so, at least my ability to feel and sense spiritual energy seemed to be somewhat heightened when I was over there, because a lot of the sites are still there. So David, I'm going to move on with David Spangler from Findhorn. He came back here and started the Lorien Society, which is very much up and running. It's lorien.org is the website for that. And he had a gift of being able to work with subtle beings, with beings from other dimensions. And he said that happened to him once when he was little. He came onto the planet with that. And he also, from that kind of connection, very much got into the concept that each of us, when we incarnate onto this planet, when we come into this planet, that it creates an energy shift that turns each of us into a little generator of our own, so that we don't have to get all of our energy from a higher source, although that's very helpful and certainly guidance that way, but that we're kind of our own transforming station, and we can pump that energy up ourselves and are quite powerful, which means that and the direction he takes that is that power can be used for healing, for working either directly with people or over distances. And so he works with subtle hygiene, which was helping to keep energy systems clean, and also with world work with the planet and with different things that happen. But a very, very fascinating study that he has with the Lorien Society. So that's kind of where the Findhorn, my Findhorn path came down to, and that's still an active part of my spiritual life now, as is looking at work with addictive processes and what a person can learn from and use from having been caught up with or involved with or a witness of different sorts of addictive processes or mental illness. And where it's really brought me is that everything is okay. That even the stuff that looks really awful or the experiences that are really downers, that depending on my perspective, I can either be a victim or I can be a student. And so often the people are in the victim mindset of, ain't it awful, or if they wouldn't do that to me, I'd be okay. But switching that perspective to looking at, all right, what's the gem inside this wad of mud? And I kind of think of it that way, that a rock of mud and gunk, and you hose it down, and there's something there. There's actually a story about a Buddhist, or it was actually a Buddha, a clay Buddha, huge clay Buddha that was being moved from one temple to another. I'm not sure if this was Thailand or somewhere, but they were moving this on big carts. This is back a ways. And they were moving it, they came to a river and they had to move it across the river to get it to the new temple, and it fell in the water. The big clay Buddha fell in the water. And when it did, the water started getting into the clay and it started breaking off, and they realized it was a gold Buddha. It was a solid gold Buddha, not a clay Buddha. And I think about that a lot when I think about the things in my life that...
That's a true story.
It is a true story. No, it's not a
No,
parable.
not a parable.
But it could be. But I think about that.
It's a true story that is a parable.
There you go. It's your multi-purpose story. But I think about that when I have difficult times or things that are just weighing on me. That it's a clay Buddha, and I can either get my hands dirty and get pissed off at it, or I can wash it down and see what's in there. What's in there for me? What's in there for my, and to move me more toward my enlightenment? What's in there for me to get? What's in there for me to be able to use with other people? And more and more as I get to be an old fart, that becomes more important. That service becomes more important. How can this be used to assist whoever, whatever? How can it be used to assist? And that's where the joy comes from more and more and more, is just being able to be of assistance, and especially with the folks that, there's so many people that are almost the walking dead. There's so many. And so I've been privileged to be able to work in my profession with people that are, they're this far from death often when I first get to know them. And I work with a lot of other people that can help to, bring those folks back to life. I was at the university, I teach at the university as well, and I was at the university the other day talking with my daughter and eating a bagel. And I'm talking about addictions here, food is one of mine. And we were sitting in the bagel shop on campus, and I looked over and I saw a familiar face. And I said, hang on a second. And I went over and I wasn't sure, she looked really good, but I called this gal's name, or who I thought she was, and she turned around and her eyes lit up and she came over and gave me a hug. And this was a gal I had worked with in addictions treatment, and who knew if she would be able to last the night when we first saw her. And to see her there looking wonderful, radiant face, in school, just finishing her degree, that's pretty hard to beat. That's pretty hard to beat. So what else? How much time we got here?
We've got about 8 minutes for a few more questions.
I'm just wondering, in your branch once a month meetings, is there like a structure for learning how to trust your inner wisdom? How does that?
Well, what we do, we all consider ourselves fairly neophytes in this. Actually, the more and more I learn about ancient wisdom, the stupider I get. That's what I feel.
The more you know, the more you know you don't know.
That's right. That's right. Yeah, but the more comfortable I get with not knowing. So what we do, we watch DVDs of people who have done more study than we have, and the society is very, very good about sending us DVDs, or we'll rent them, or we'll just check them out from the library there. So we'll watch it. It's a potluck, by the way, which is good. So us foodies like that. But we watch a DVD, and often they come with questions, or else we make up our own and we discuss them. And so it's
we have done. I did a outline of the Gnostic.
We've studied every once in a while. We'll study a different book. We did a study of Gnosticism, and Jim helped us with that. So we just kind of decide, we're a small group, so we just decide what we would like to learn more about. We just recently brought in a speaker from Wheaton, Pablo Cinder. He was wonderful, wonderful. And he was here at the beginning of the year. So sometimes we'll get speakers, they'll just send them down from Illinois, which is lovely. And you know, everyone's welcome, it's free. If you want to join the society, you can, but there's no local dues, you know, other than, you know, bring something for the potluck, that's nice. We like that. And we get together the first Monday of every month, and we do that at the home, right now at the home of someone. If we get, you know, enough people where we don't fit there anymore,
We should give your mother a little bit of a plug. Now, you've talked about her a little bit. But
Yeah.
Mona was married to the son of one of the
founders of Alcoholics Anonymous.
of Alcoholics Anonymous.
Wow.
And she, for years, traveled and conducted clinics.
She did serenity retreats.
Yeah.
She was a counselor. She's still around. That's where we meet, is at her house.
At her house.
She conducts serenity retreats. She was married to Smitty, who is Dr. Bob and Bill Wilson founded Alcoholics Anonymous, and Dr. Bob's son Smitty was who my mother was married to in his later years and hers. He actually died here in Memphis. He lived here in his last few years. And she and I currently actually are working on a book on Dr. Bob. So it's a slow go, as you know.
And I'd like to also mention Linda Disney, who's on the board.
Linda Disney
Is a well-known artist, and her book, I have, 2 of my books have her covers, her
Wow.
paintings.
and she is wonderful.
And if you go to the, I think the gallery behind the booksellers there at the...
Lusk?
Yeah,
Is that Lusk?
yeah. She's prone to doing these huge paintings of river scenes and things, big ones. And you'll see them in banks. I've seen them in, I think, First Tennessee Bank.
Yeah, she does. Yeah, she does some wonderful.
So there's a few plugs there, but also we need to have contact numbers here before we run out of time.
Okay, I'm gonna give you mine, because I can send you wherever. My basic contact number is, you know, it's easy. 901 210 1020. Isn't that nice? I've kept my phone company for a long time because of that. So that would be if you're interested in coming to the meetings. We also have a Facebook. Let me see if we can get that right. Theosophical Society Memphis, I believe, is how you'll find us on Facebook, or something very close to that. And that lets you know about our local meetings. The Theosophy.org, Theosophical.org, excuse me, www.theosophical.org, that will get you to the Wheaton site. That's the headquarters in America. And oh my gosh, there's resources there that will just blow you away. Lots and lots and lots of audios and videos that you can listen to of amazing, amazing speakers.
Could you also talk just a moment about one of the most famous artists from Memphis, who was very much Burton.
Burton Callicott was here, and he has, well, they painted over it, but he did the shell in Memphis, and he was a very, very famous artist here, still is. He's gone on somewhere now.
He lived into his 90s.
He did.
And we went to his memorial service at the Church of the River.
Yeah.
And as the minister got up to do the funeral, a fox came out of the woods and sat down right on the bank, looked right between us and the river.
Wow.
And he sat there, and then just as the preacher was out to finish, he got up and went back out. I think he got more attention than the preacher.
Right, it was probably Burton when they were visiting, but Burton was a long time member of the Theosophical Society, and 2 of his paintings hang in the headquarters in Wheaton as well. So we have a long history in Memphis as well as nationally and internationally, and everyone is invited to come and check us out and listen to somebody or study a book. And
When is the next Theosophical Society meeting?
It is next Monday. It's the day after Easter.
Day after Easter, write that down. It'll be fun. Her mother's home is just off of Stage Road in Bartlett. We're just about to Bartlett, as you're going into Bartlett from the west. and it's easy to find, and it's a good treat.
Give me a
It's
call
really
and I'll
good.
give you an address or directions, and y'all too.
Well, thank you very much for being with us, Elaine.
Thank you.
And all of you who are here in the audience, and thank you folks for watching Core Concepts.